Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and so many new faces. We actually have over 60 people registered for today. We normally have about half of the people join us in person and then the remainder joining us with the replay. So thank you. And we're so grateful to those of you that were actually able to join us in real time this afternoon. So thank you, thank you. We have a very diverse group. We have developers, we have nonprofit leaders, we have government staff, brokers, we have other consultants. We literally have representatives from all different areas of the sector who are all working toward the same goal around delivering housing in Canada. So it's a really exciting topic today, and I'm really grateful to all of you for joining us for the Masterclass on Development Feasibility. So this hour has been very intentionally designed to help you to plan to unlock your land's full potential. So this is a masterclass. Mastery is comprehensive knowledge or skills in a subject. And in the program today, you'll be guided by myself. And I'm very proud to have a special guest, Diana Lamb, joining us. We are both recognized experts in the area of development feasibility. I will be delivering the first module of the program with a focus on government policy and core principles and techniques in development feasibility. My module is going to culminate with a 3-minute game plan for your project so that we'll get specific around your intentional success. And from there, the second module will be delivered by Diana, covering financial feasibility to hone your skills further. So whether you're a seasoned professional, as many of you are, or you're a passionate novice, and I think some of you fit that category as well, this masterclass is really intended to help you remove the roadblocks that are preventing housing from being delivered and to help your specific project to move forward. So Des, if you could, actually, I'll go ahead. No, I don't need you. I've got it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share the PowerPoint presentation. So I'll start off with a land acknowledgement that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. It's springtime, and on my walks, I'm noticing that the salmonberries are blossoming, and this is really reminding me of the long Indigenous history of this area. I have over 25 years of experience as an urban planner and working in real estate, and my goal in offering this session today is to support leaders in this industry in taking steps to deliver housing supply. So today's program is structured into 3 sections, and I briefly alluded to this at the start. First, we're going to delve into Channel Consulting's development feasibility framework, and through interactive exercises and activities, you're going to have a chance to apply concepts on your own project case studies. This segment is really about fine-tuning, addressing common challenges, and really fostering that mindset of continuous improvement. Next, founder of Crafted Insights, Diana Lamb, will provide crucial information on financial feasibility, because financial feasibility stands as a primary barrier to housing supply. And so learning from Diana is really essential in today's session. Last, we'll engage in an open forum for participant questions and discussion, and we'll be able to help talk about some of your specific challenges and concerns. So by the end of the class, I'm hoping that you're going to come away with 2 or 3 actionable insights that elevate your skills so that you specifically are more effective as a contributor in addressing the housing problem. So my work is to help people find the truth about what they can do with their land, to facilitate implementation of housing solutions. And the mechanism that I use is the development feasibility framework. That framework has evolved and matured through feedback from diverse clients, developers and REITs, nonprofit organizations, government bodies, their investment committees, capital committees, and boards. And consistently, the feedback that we receive about this framework is that it's unparalleled in BC. So I'm now extending the impact of channel consulting, and I'm in the final stages of launching Uplift Fund. Uplift Fund is poised to inject $100 million of private capital into the pre-development phase of 10 transit-oriented rental housing projects in Vancouver and Toronto over the next 5 years. For further details about the Uplift Fund, I encourage you to visit upliftfund.ca. Right now, we're working on project number 2, and we're open for sites and investors. So through this masterclass, my intention is that you will achieve the following learning outcomes to help you be more effective in delivering housing projects. I'm going to go through this list, and I'd really encourage you to participate in the chat and really encourage you to share what you're most hoping to achieve from this session. So the first outcome is to gain a comprehensive understanding of project goals, constraints, scope, enabling a clear and structured approach with planning and execution. The second goal is to acquire the skills to analyze risks, finances, and technical feasibility with confidence, allowing for informed decision-making throughout every stage of the project lifecycle. The third learning outcome is to learn how to craft informed recommendations for success that enables decision-making. And fourth, to develop the ability to create robust risk mitigation plans to proactively address obstacles. So please add in the chat, which one are you most hoping to achieve today? So this module of the masterclass, and again, there's 2 modules, the first one that I'm leading and the second one, which Diana will be leading, is really focusing on government policy. However, it is important to keep in mind that the delivery of housing faces significant challenges due to a number of factors beyond government policy. Of course, there's a labor shortage and surging immigration. There's escalating construction costs, and there's the current interest rate environment. And these challenges are exacerbated and really collectively driving the housing crisis to the unprecedented levels that we see. So while this module that I'm presenting is largely focused on government policy, you can see that Diana's module is very important today because financial variables are so critical to assessing project feasibility. So again, if you could just sort of weigh in the chat, who here wants to excel at development feasibility? So please give me a heck yes if it's something that you're really wanting to excel at. Okay, because if you want to excel at development feasibility, it is really critically important to understand the political context. So the housing problem confronting Canada, it's truly staggering. CMHC projections indicate a need for 5.8 million homes by 2023 to accommodate immigration and population growth. To put this into perspective, this is over double the number of homes we've ever delivered in Canada in a single year, or in that same period, pardon me. And the population of Greater Toronto is 5.9 million. So we would need to build an additional Toronto in 7 years to keep pace. Okay, so as we operate within a fiercely competitive global market for labor and talent, addressing the housing problem becomes not just a choice or a nice to have, but it's become a necessity. So both the federal and provincial governments are looking to municipalities to play a pivotal role in addressing the crisis. And we've seen that through the recent legislative changes made by the province of British Columbia. Also, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has revealed that there is considerable cost and infrastructure required to address the housing problem. So in the average infrastructure cost per building a new unit is about $107,000. So in light of these major challenges, there are opportunities for projects to proceed, and it's imperative that we all do the best we can to help and to be better at navigating government policy and leveraging collaboration and partnerships. As many of you are aware, the British Columbia Legislature enacted about 20 new pieces of legislation related to housing supply during the fall 2023 session. And also recently, we've just had updates for the Vancouver Charter. The National Housing Task Force reflected many of these same themes in their 140 recommendations that they released last month. So for those of you who are keen to understand what all of this means for your development feasibility, it's a webinar in itself, and we offered that webinar previously. You can scan this QR code, and you can certainly access this one-pager and watch a replay of a deeper dive on this topic. So this slide really serves as a cornerstone of the government policy risk assessment in this masterclass. So about a year ago, we launched a free development feasibility workbook. Clearly, there's nothing like it. It was downloaded over 2,000 times. And so we're currently beta testing an updated version of this workbook that we intend to publish in the second quarter. If you are interested in being a beta tester, you can apply to do so by just sending me an email. But in the interest of time, to ensure that we address the advanced feedback that we received from you participants, our approach is going to be pen and paper today, rather than actually doing a dive into the workbook. So the next slide, this slide and the next two are really a hands-on activity that are designed to deepen your understanding through real-time analysis. It's a quick drop-in, given the fact that we have a short timeline today, but we're going to start by going through these government policies. You may want to take a screen capture of this and come back to it. We'll also be issuing a replay tomorrow, but I will be walking you through these policies. We're then going to be going through, on the next slide, a development feasibility framework for managing risk. And then the last part of an exercise we're doing here together is to develop a 3-minute game plan for managing risk on your project. Okay, so make sure you have a pen and paper and take a moment to take note or refresh yourself on all of the policy that may be impacting the development feasibility on your land. So I'm going to start off by just sharing that there really are, you could say, 5 levels of government in Canada. We have our Indigenous relationships, which are extremely important, our federal government, provincial government, regional government, which is sometimes forgotten, or sometimes folks aren't aware of the role of the regional growth strategy. And then we have our municipal government. And so we've wrapped this up into these 3 areas. So for each of these areas, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you typical questions that come up around each of these policies. So if you want to just take a pause, think about a case study, think about a particular piece of land that is either your project or a project you'd like to do that you're familiar with, but I want you to have a particular case study in mind. Okay, so thinking of federal, is there a need to do Indigenous engagement on this project? Does it trigger the Federal Impact Assessment Act or the Port of Vancouver's Project and Environmental Review? Does it trigger a need for review by Fisheries and Oceans Canada? Does it impact fish or fish habitat? In which case it does trigger Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and in many cases, Indigenous engagement. Does it trigger Transport Canada review? Is it under the flight path? Is there a marine component? Is it on the river where it's going to impact potentially marine traffic? Is there an infrastructure component here? For example, how secure is the funding for the transit infrastructure that you're thinking you have? And also, is there an eligibility for GST exemption, for example, with a rental housing project? How does it impact it by capital gains and income tax policy? So really taking a pause and thinking, oh gosh, is there actually a federal level to my project? Sometimes people are surprised that they have a ditch or a stream by their property, and it actually triggers a review by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. The next level is provincial. And so we've seen, as I mentioned, the recent updates to the legislation, to the Local Government Act and to the Vancouver Charter. We have, those are extremely important to be aware of. And again, I encourage you to watch that previous webinar. It's on the Channel Consulting resources page, resources on current issues, if you want to really catch up and understand more about that. I encourage you to look at the provincial transit-oriented area guidelines, which are available online. So what do the recent housing statutes mean for your project? The Environmental Management Act. Was your site previously used for commercial purposes? Riparian area regulations. Is your project near a ditch or a stream? Does it trigger a provincial review as well as a federal one? And if so, does that trigger Indigenous engagement? Is it within 800 meters of a controlled access interchange? Does it require an authorization from the Ministry of Transportation? What about the Agricultural Land Commission? Is this a site that's been excluded previously from the Agricultural Land Reserve? What about rental policy? Is there rental control policy coming from the province, which is going to impact your business plan, which are going to impact the viability of the project? And infrastructure planning. Are there opportunities to leverage provincial infrastructure objectives in order to make the project happen? And also property taxation. What are the property taxation issues that I need to be aware of? Regional and municipal. For regional, some folks aren't aware of the regional growth strategy. And so, for example, if a property is designated as industrial in the regional growth strategy, you'll need to go through a regional growth strategy amendment in order to have a residential use, which is very difficult, particularly in light of the regional industrial land strategy. So this is something that people often phone me about, and it's a lot more complex than actually can be anticipated. Official community plans, another critical piece. How old is the official plan? Official plans need to be updated as part of Bill 44 by the end of next year. And so we should have a pretty good set to work with going forward, but it's going to be messy for the next little while. And so what is the status of the official community plan and the area plans? Are the zoning bylaws up to date? Again, by the end of June, municipalities will need to update their zoning bylaws for multiplex, for 4 to 6 unit development. But otherwise, zoning bylaws in some cases are very outdated. And then development permits, things like development permits for environment, for streamside setbacks, steep slopes, wildfires, design, which development permits apply for your project. And building permits, which we sometimes think is the biggest headache, maybe isn't as difficult as some of these other ones when you get down into it. And so what are the building requirements specific to this municipality, and being aware of their staffing levels? The biggest problem we have with building permits right now is timelines. And then other agreements and permits. What other things do you need to look for? View cones, development cost levy waivers that can be achieved through rental housing development or below market development, housing agreements, heritage. And so all of these things make up the universe of government policy that is impacting your feasibility for developing your site. So I'm hoping that everyone's had a chance to go through, and maybe some of you have had aha moments about things that you haven't thought of or that you're really proud of. Feel free to share in the chat anything that strikes you here as important, maybe for others as insights. So this slide really provides an introduction to the development feasibility framework for managing risk, okay? So your mastery of development feasibility and risk management discovers at the top with number 1, discovery. A meticulous exploration of the site, uncovering both the challenges and the potential opportunities. Through number 2, strategic planning, and number 3, stakeholder engagement, we navigate through these complexities, identifying areas for collaboration and partnership. Critical thinking and analysis are at the forefront through the discovery, the strategizing, and the engagement phases. These pivotal stages, 1 to 3, pave the way for effective solution generation, plan development, and ultimately successful project delivery. So now I want to take a minute and get back to your project. Let's get back to your project, get your mind into your project. Let's think about your project specifically, how you can take meaningful action to get more certainty and make your project happen. So you may want to just take a moment to reflect, and then I'll have you add your comment in the chat. But number 1, around discovery, have you really explored your site? Have you really uncovered the challenges and the potential opportunities? Is there more to do? Okay, I want you just to reflect on that and really, what are the key opportunities and challenges with your site? Okay, number 2, I want you to think about strategizing, critical thinking. Are there different things you could do to deal with these issues that you have with your site? And number 3, who can help you? Who can you be engaging as stakeholders? Neighbors, the business district, the neighborhood association. Are there government folks? Are there subject matter consultants that you can engage? Sometimes people discover and then they go straight to the planning department and ask them for strategizing, rather than actually strategizing on their own, engaging and bringing solutions. So my advice is always think about your site, really strategize, brainstorm, generate a universe of strategies to deal with those issues with your site, and do the work of engagement. It's hard work, but it's extremely important, and it will yield dividends in coming up with and unearthing solutions that are actionable and that you can present, realizing that there's no easy sites left. There are no easy sites left, and so there's going to be compromises. And so in those solutions, you'll be able to identify, well, even though this, we will do that. Or even though we need to do this, we're going to be able to do this other thing. So you'll be able to propose variances in a way that's got substance to it. And that's where it comes in. Can you develop solutions? What solutions are there to your specific problems? What does that plan look like if you want to deliver? So what are your challenges under discovery? What strategies? Who do you need to engage? What solutions do you know of already that might be possible? Is there a plan that can be in place? And what does it look like for you to deliver? What is it that you want to deliver, or what are you willing to compromise in order to make it happen to deliver? Okay, so if you wanted to just go ahead and I'm just looking here at the chat. Yeah, please go ahead. What in here is really hitting home for you in terms of discovery, strategizing, engaging, unearthing solutions, developing the plan, deliver? What's a growth area for you? If you just did a little bit more of this one thing, do you think you'd have more opportunity? Okay, so please go ahead and share in the chat. Okay, and now we're on our last slide. This is our 3-minute game plan. So what is, based on the thinking that you did, going through the government policy, going through that framework of thinking about risk, what is the number one biggest risk to the feasibility of your project right now? What is the number one biggest risk? Okay, if you want to just think about that for a second, write it down. Okay, now I want you to think about 3 options that are there for you to address this risk and make it work. What are 3 options that you think you could try to address this risk? 3 options, thinking about your project, all the government policy, strategizing, engaging, unearthing solutions, making a plan, delivering. What are 3 options that you have? Okay. And then what is your number one top recommendation on how you can manage this risk better to ensure the project's feasibility? Is there a recommendation that you could take to a decision maker, the owner, the municipality, the neighbor, that will help you to manage this risk better? What is your one top recommendation? So this is the final exercise in our development feasibility module about government policy. And so once you've had a chance to just reflect individually, if you wanted to just share any of your key takeaways in the chat, please continue to share. And I'm going to go ahead and pass on to Diana Lamb. Diana, welcome. Really pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Tegan. It's nice to see everybody here, and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to share my screen right now. All right. So as Tegan mentioned, today I'll be talking about the economics of delivering the housing supply and a financial feasibility, and a small exercise in one of the tools that we can use to evaluate the financial profitability of the projects and the land development that we may be working on today. So my background, I've been in the industry for over a decade now. I've been working with developers, institutional groups, private landowners, and primarily looking at the financial feasibility of their projects, whether it is ground up land development or even an investment property where there's existing property on site and we're looking at the income and cash flow. My background experience spans not only in the residential asset class, but across industrial, office, retail as well. So I come with a lot of experience. I've seen a lot of different types of projects and a lot of different unique ways to structure projects in a way that works for all the stakeholders involved. All right, so today we're going to be looking at what is the financial model? What do we mean when we say financial model, and what can we do with one? We're going to be looking at one particular technique, which is called the land residual, and we'll also have a short discussion on capital. All right, so a financial model, this is a tool we use to assess whether we believe that a project is economically viable. So how much profits might we achieve on this project? How much capital is required to execute on the project? So capital, what we mean by that is how much cash or money or funds do we need in order to execute on the project? Typically, these funds come from 2 sources. They can come from debt, which is money that we borrow from the bank or a lender, or they can come from equity, which would be investors or our own investments that we're making into the project. A financial model can also allow us to determine what the financial returns are and whether these returns justify the costs that we need to incur to execute this project and the amount of risk that the project inherently has. Typically, when we're putting together a financial model, we have several key assumptions that we need to know. These include the land cost, project costs, so hard costs and soft costs, what the projected revenues are, and how long will it take for us to achieve and execute on this project. So what are the timelines for this? And so there are many different ways to put together a financial model, many different tools. It really depends on what you're looking for in particular or what your investors are looking for. One technique we're going to look at today is the land residual technique. So I know there's a couple of appraisals on the call, so I know this is going to be very familiar for them because this is also a common appraisal technique we use to value how much we believe a land is worth today. So what is a land residual? So essentially what we're trying to determine through this financial tool is what's the maximum price that we can pay for the land. So what we would need to know is what we believe that the revenues are, and then we then subtract all the costs associated with the development and the construction of the project. Then we would need to subtract out what profit margins as a developer that we want to achieve on this project. And after that, whatever the amount is remaining, that is the maximum price or the value of the land based on all these assumptions that we are making. This is typically something we do at a very early stage of the land development. This helps us figure out how much can we afford to pay for the land today based on what we do know about it. All right, so to start off with, I like to start off with the revenues. Right now, all the costs that we're looking at is on a per square foot basis. And so in this case, let's say we're looking at doing a multi-unit building, and we believe that the revenues we can achieve is about $14.50 a foot. We would then subtract out any selling costs, such as sales commission. And so that leaves us with a net revenue of about $14.14 on a per square foot basis. Next, we'll layer in the costs that we expect that we would need to occur in order to execute on this project. And so typical costs we would see are the construction costs. How much does it take to build this building? Off-site costs, so now we're seeing, as Tegan had alluded to, more infrastructure demands from the city. So these can include sewer upgrades, sewer connections, sidewalks, lighting, street lighting, and whatnot. Because we're quite an early stage of the project, it is prudent to carry some contingency to account for some of the unknowns, typically carrying around 5%. Then we move into our soft cost estimates. So soft costs can include anything from design, the consultant, your engineering teams. It also includes the municipal fees, legal, holding costs, as well as potentially like property taxes and whatnot. So right now, today, we're just using an estimate about 30% of our hard costs is what our soft costs will be. And again, we like to apply contingency on that to be prudent. Once we have our project costs figured out, then we layer in our financing costs. In this case, I'm assuming that I will likely use a construction loan to finance the cost of the build. And so we have an estimate based on an interest rate assumption and how long would we need to use this loan for. So this would be the cost of the debt we are using for the project. So now we can see that all our project costs that we believe we will incur before we even add in the land purchase is around $665 per foot. So in our next step, we like to layer in the profit margins. So based on the profile of this project, how long it might take to get there, how risky we believe this project to be, what profit margin would we as a developer want to make. And so right now I'm assuming I would like to achieve a project margin of about 15% on the total project costs. So now we have all the key assumptions we need to figure out the land residual value. We have our net revenues of about $14.14 per foot. We have our total project cost of about $665 a foot. We know that we want to make a profit of around $184 a foot. And so that remaining amount is $564 per square foot. And so this essentially tells us that this is the maximum that we are willing to pay for the land based on all the assumptions and what we know today. And so what we can see with this land residual technique, it also allows us to evaluate the impacts of different potential risk items we see to this project. So for example, we're using about $450 per square foot on the construction cost. But talking to people in the industry, maybe we get a range. Some people are saying lower and some people are telling us a much higher amount, like say $425 a foot. What this tool allows us to do is when we plug in different assumptions, we can see how it impacts our profit margins and how it might impact how much we are able to pay for the land. What we're seeing in today's market, especially if you've already paid for the land, for example, we're seeing that the profit margin is really one of the only lines that can move in today's market. So what I mean by that is if we're looking at revenues, because of the high interest rates, we are seeing that revenues have been fairly flat. They haven't really grown much. We're still seeing a little bit of inflation in our construction costs, so we know that this number is likely moving. We know that timelines are uncertain, so this can increase our holding costs for the project. We know that municipal fees and say, for example, the fees that Metro Vancouver is charging are also increasing. And so the soft costs are also going up. We're hopeful that we'll see some potential drops in the interest rates, but that hasn't happened yet. So we're not seeing any savings on the interest cost movement. Land is one of the first items that get locked in on a project. Well, our land costs, we've already paid for it. And so all we really have left is this developer's profit margin. And so one thing that we have seen in the industry as costs have increased and revenues have remained fairly stable is that profit margins, that's the only line left within this financial tool that can move, and we have been starting to see it come down. And so this is where a financial tool can be very helpful. It allows us to understand where our returns are, what is that profitability, and as we start to learn and get more concrete facts about the data about the project, what does happen to that profit margin? How can we work through the different line items within our budget and costs to maintain that profit margin if that is possible? So with that example, what it allows us to really hone in on is that project profitability, is how feasible is it to execute on this project. So we can determine what are those financial returns. As well, because in development, what happens is that the revenues, we don't actually get to achieve these revenues until the very end of the project. And so all those costs that we are seeing, that needs to be incurred upfront. And so we would need to find a way to fund all these costs, which is how much capital do we need to execute on this project. So typically, again, capital is made out of debt, money we borrow from the bank, and equity, money that we put in ourselves or that we find investors to put in alongside of us. And so when we have financial tools, especially at an early stage of the profit, it allows us to manage the financial risk of the project. It gives us a better understanding, really, where are the high risk points and how they impact the profitability, as well as how are we going to fund this project until we can complete it and sell off all the units. So when we think of capital, there are many things that capital considers. So I mean this also for lenders and for investors. They look at very similar things, although they might have different requirements on what they are willing to take on. And so why do we need to think about capital when it comes to real estate development? Unless you're one of those lucky people that can fund the development with cash all on your own. I mean, even if you're funding it all on your own, it's still an investment that you're making at the end of the day, and there's an opportunity cost to this investment that you're making. And so there is a risk return paradigm that we would always like to think about when it comes to development projects and putting capital into a project. And so what we mean by this is that when projects have a lower risk, typically a lower return is acceptable. When projects have a high risk, in exchange for taking on a riskier project, we want to have the potential to make a much higher return. So things that can impact capital, things that can impact the risk return paradigm here. So timelines, how long does it take for me to get my money back, my investment back, as well as make my return? And so when timelines are uncertain, for example, with rezonings, we've seen that it can be a little bit unpredictable how long it might take to rezone a project. That adds to the risk of the project. Profitability, does the profit and does the financial returns make sense? Based on what risks we're seeing, like for example, in the market with the timelines, with construction costs, are we making enough of a return to compensate for that risk? And interest rates. Interest rates, we've seen it is a cost item within a project financial feasibility, but interest rates also impact the capital considerations. So when interest rates are high, like in today's market, what we see is that even in lower risk investment opportunities, for example, a GIC, those GIC savings rates have also increased. So when a low risk product like a GIC commands a higher return, for me to be willing to take my money from a safe investment opportunity and putting it into a higher risk opportunity, my return expectations go up even more compared to a period where interest rates are lower and GIC saving rates are lower. And that is because, again, there is an opportunity cost to our investment opportunities. When there is a safer opportunity that's generating a decent return, well, for me to want to take on that risk, that return needs to be even higher. And so that's why when we talk about interest rates, it's not only an item that impacts the cost line of a project budget, but also it can impact investors if we need to raise capital. And as we're also seeing, it can impact revenues as well, because it impacts how much a borrower can borrow and to pay for the finished product ultimately. And so we can see that interest rates actually have a very wide-ranging impact across all aspects of the real estate development. All right, so in today's little masterclass, what I was hoping that you take away is the importance of a financial model. Financial model can be a very essential tool for determining the profitability of the project as well as the capital requirements. One financial model that we went through today is the land residual. So this allows the developers to determine the maximum price that the project can pay for the land based on the potential profits it believes that they can generate from that land. As well as we talked about capital, it generally requires a higher profit margin for taking on riskier projects. And so that's all these things are items that we keep in mind. And by having a robust financial tool, it can really help us better understand how much capital do we need, where are the risk points, how do these high risk items might impact the potential profitability of it, and making sure that the capital is out there for us to execute on these projects that we would like to take on. All right, so that was kind of my little quick masterclass for today. Happy to answer any questions. Now I believe we have time to open it up to the floor, and feel free to share your questions, whether it's in the chat or directly with all of us. And Tegan and I will both be here for the next little while to answer and have any discussions on the items that we went over today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diana. That was such a critical component, such a key module. There was a lot of engagement in the chat with some specific questions, and I'm going to get to those in just 1 minute. I just wanted to first mention a few things that I wanted to cover off before we close out and before we enter the Q&A. So we'll have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. So we'll have about 10 minutes to answer your questions. And so please keep them coming in the chat. I wanted to also mention that there are a number of valuable resources on the Channel Consulting resource page. This webinar will also be posted there, so channelconsulting.ca/resources. We do have a couple of open spots to support clients one-to-one if you think that you need that type of support. We're also right now accepting introductions toward sites for our second project in Uplift Fund, and also to investors for Uplift Fund. And we're going to be doing another webinar on June the 4th. And Des, if you can just put the link in the chat, that one is going to be about investment criteria for rental housing projects. And so that's definitely a very relevant topic, piggybacking on what we just talked about with Diana's presentation today. Des is also going to put a link in there to a feedback form. I've been doing these masterclass or webinars or workshops or roundtables now for a couple of years. And the feedback really helps to continue to improve and make sure they're relevant to this community. So we really would appreciate your feedback as well. So I just wanted to sort of mention those items before we go into the Q&A, just so that we don't miss any of you. But Diana, the first question that was coming up, which was an excellent question that both Michael and Zach were mentioning, and Derlin had referenced it as well, was around the nonprofit developer. And so there's sort of two parts to it: is how does this work with social ROI and nonprofit development? And then Derlin's question was really around keeping something in mind when you're partnering with a developer around the nonprofit. Is there something that you could shed light on there as part of this masterclass mindset, Diana?
Yeah, I think when it comes to nonprofit development, I think that's always been one of the challenges, is that even though I think what we see on the nonprofit side is typically the revenues are lower, right? Because essentially it is a nonprofit project. But unfortunately, we see that the costs don't really change. And so when we're looking at the hard costs and whatnot, it is still very much the same. And I think that's why we're seeing kind of more and more tools and policies coming from the government to support the nonprofit sector. And one of those items was more favorable financing. So that does impact one of the lines we see on the pro forma. And again, making it easier for nonprofits to access debt as one of the capital sources, all that does help with the pro forma. And again, especially if the nonprofit already owns the land asset themselves, that also takes care of one of the cost items within a financial model. However, that is kind of one of the challenges, though, that we do see that, in terms of design work, consultant, even for some of the municipal fees, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit, those costs don't really change. And that is one of the challenges that a lot of nonprofit groups are facing, is it's hard for them to access capital, and how are they going to find the funds that they need to pay for all these costs for development. I do see a comment about the return on investment and how does that social aspect work its way into it. I think it really comes down to the investors and the capital groups that you're working with, and what returns are they looking for. And that these groups do need to understand that as a nonprofit project, the return on investment, the financial return on investment will be lower than a for-profit development. So what occasionally we do see is that developer profit margin line, maybe instead of 15%, we do see some groups are willing to accept something lower or break even in order to make this project work. And so that is kind of how we do see those nuances between the for-profit and nonprofit side.
There's a follow-up question here, Diana, about whether or not the developer receives any tax incentives for helping a nonprofit.
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure on this space in particular. I think it depends on how the partnership is structured as well. There are many different ways developers and nonprofits have worked together in the past. And I think it really kind of comes down to that structuring that you work through. And so you probably would want some legal and accounting advice to see what's available out there. If it's a nonprofit kind of bringing their land into the deal, and the developer is the one that provides the rest of the capital and execute on it, there might be some, but that is definitely not my area of expertise. But that's something definitely worth exploring for sure. I guess the easy answer is there's nothing clear that's been said in the policy that I'm aware of that does help in terms of taxation.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and answer a question from Kathleen. Michael, I see you have a more detailed question. We'll come back to that. Kathleen is asking a question around the latest government changes and do they limit consultation, particularly with neighbors and NIMBYs? So this is a really great question, and it really comes down to the heart of Bill 44. So the intent of Bill 44 is really to take a more long-term planning lens toward approvals. So the province has eliminated public hearings for residential housing projects. So it is for residential projects that public hearings have been removed, okay? And so the government changes limit consultation in that regard. There will be no public hearing for a residential project. So long as it's compliant with the official community plan. Official community plans need to be updated by the end of next year, and housing needs reports have to be updated. That's all part of Bill 44. Okay, now the feedback that we're hearing from some of the municipalities is that it's not as easy. It's a little bit messy because governments are now municipal governments in a really difficult spot because they are being asked to approve projects even though the neighbors might not like them. Okay, and so they still have discretion for zoning. And so even though there's not a public hearing, they can still vote down zoning. So it just adds a certain complexity to it. So there's still value in folks who are leading projects, doing the consultation and the engagement with the neighbors in order to ensure that they understand the interests of the neighbors in order that they're able to get the votes at council. So even though we've eliminated the public hearing, we still have this piece where there is value in doing public consultation. Does that answer your question, Kathleen? Do municipalities encourage input during the OCP? I think you mean, yeah. Yeah, so this is going to be your chance. So for those of you with projects or living in a neighborhood, what is the opportunity? The opportunity is to provide feedback into the official community plan updates that are happening between now and the end of next year. So that will be the time when residents can have their say about what that residential development looks like in their communities. Okay, Diana, did you see Michael's question?
Yeah, any leverage we can get to help keep the landowner in the deal until we reach the first construction draw. Again, I think everything comes down to deal structuring, and I think it kind of comes down to the price. So you are asking this landowner to wait and not sell their land and to wait for you to get to your first construction draw. And depending on what project you're working on, if the rezoning is done, like for the multiplex in Vancouver, like what they've done is pretty good, right? Like it's pretty fast, clear timelines. And so I think you could try to work out a deal with the landowner where you do remove subjects, but you don't actually close until you get close to your first construction draw. Usually though, in exchange, the landowners would be expecting something. And so sometimes you might see them asking for a higher price and whatnot. And I think it's really up to you to figure out whether the higher price or whatever it is in consideration that the landowner for, does that make sense for your deal? Sometimes it does. It can help reduce your equity needs, for example, because when you get to your construction draw, your leverage is quite a bit higher than if you were to get a mortgage for just the land. And so that can delay your equity requirements and can help delay your capital, which is something that we were talking about. So definitely there's lots of tools, there's lots of different ideas, and I think it is a way to get creative as well.
Okay, so we've got 3 minutes remaining. Is there any other questions from anyone else before we wrap up? Okay, so Diana and I are both on LinkedIn. Feel free to
Tegan,
connect with
Tegan,
us.
I just sent you one.
Oh, Gary. Hi, Gary.
Yes, it's explaining how the, if you have to go through spot zoning, so you're not complying directly with the specifics of the OCP perhaps, but there's general considerations that allow you to apply. And then the municipality can take up to 75% of the increase in value. Can you discuss a bit how that's calculated and how you can minimize that if you have a project that is really, producing housing that's really needed?
Sure. Okay. So basically right now, the way things work in British Columbia are that there are community amenity contributions that can be negotiated in municipalities based on the lift of land value that's achieved through a rezoning. And so right now through Bill 46, which is about development financing, there's an opportunity for municipalities to implement a fixed rate, which is called an amenity cost charge. However, we're in this messy time right now where municipalities won't have costed those amenity eligible items out and won't have a fixed rate for a time. So we're in this messy gap in between where we're still negotiating CACs. And so basically this is where what I do and where what Diana does really meets is basically when municipalities are negotiating CACs with developers, even for rental housing projects or other projects, what they want to see is the pro forma, and they want to understand how much value is being generated through the rezoning, even if it's a housing project or a rental housing project. And currently, for example, in West Vancouver, they will take 75% of the lift of the land value as amenity contributions. And those amenities can go toward parks and community centers, libraries, things like that. You heard at the beginning how there's a strong need for infrastructure in our communities to support growth. There certainly is. And one of the challenges we're going to have with these OCP updates over the next year and a half is we're going to have these long lists of infrastructure, which are very expensive. And amenity cost charges with the new regulation can now include things like police stations and fire halls, which are extremely expensive, but very important as our communities grow. And so it's going to be more difficult to deliver things like fabulous park space and fabulous community centers and still have housing projects be viable. So it's a very difficult time around for our country in the fact that we have a massive city building initiative that must proceed, and yet it's very difficult to make the economics work. And so this is where things like this masterclass are very near and dear to me, to help people to actually just move the dial 10%, 10%, in order that we can unlock, more projects. Out of every project I see, about 1 in 10 is actually viable. And those are just the ones that come to me. So it's a very difficult time to make housing happen, and it's a really important need that we have. So this is an important workshop for me in executing on my values, in supporting this, industry and the community, and us all being able to do more to deliver housing. Okay, so I don't know if anyone has any last closing remarks. Feel free to share your insights in the chat. Please fill out a comment form. We are both available to be of service. If folks need support with their projects, you know where to find us. And I wish everyone a wonderful day, and thank you so much for engaging. Feel free to share the link when it's sent out tomorrow with your networks. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Diana.